The day started like any other in our modest suburban home. IT sections, I conditions. Claudia was in the midst of preparing dinner, the familiar hum of the evening news playing in the background. My son, a tall, thoughtful young man of 20, was immersed in his college textbooks at the dining table. Sophie, my spirited 17-year-old daughter, was upstairs, probably lost in her music. But our routine was shattered by a phone call, a call that would unravel the life I knew. I overheard Martin, my husband of 22 years, talking in hushed tones in his study. Curiosity piqued. I paused, straining to hear his words. What I heard chilled me to the bone. She's just irresistible, you know? Young, vibrant. It's been a long time since I felt this alive. Martin chuckled, unaware of my presence. Yeah, she's pregnant. Surprised me, too. But I won't shirk my responsibility. It's exciting in a way. The room spun as his words sank in. And as there, a child. Enter, my heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I stumbled back into the kitchen, trying to process what I just heard. Alex looked up, his brow furrowing at my pale face. Mom, are you okay? He asked, his voice laced with concern. I forced a smile, my mind racing. I'm fine, just a bit tired, I lied, turning back to the stove. My hands trembled as I stirred the pot, the food forgotten. Throughout dinner, I watched Martin searching his face for signs of the man I thought I knew. He was jovial, talking animatedly about his day, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. Fixed the mask of a caring husband and father, now cracked beyond repair. After dinner, as Martin retreated to his study and Sophie to her room, I beckoned Alex to the living room. His eyes, so much like his father's, looked at me with worry. Alex, I began, my voice barely a whisper. I overheard your father on the phone. She's pregnant. X's face drained of color, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. Mom, are you sure? Dad wouldn't. But the words died in his throat as he saw the certainty in my eyes. A heavy silence fell between us, the weight of betrayal hanging in the air. This changes everything, I murmured, more to myself than to Alex. A fire ignited within me, a fierce determination to protect my family from the man I no longer recognized. We need to do something, Alex said, his voice firm, his youthful face hardened by resolve. We can't let him get away with this. I nodded, a plan slowly forming in my mind. Martin had crossed a line, and there would be consequences for me, for our children, and for the woman whose life he had entangled in his web of deceit. Revenge, a word I never thought would be part of my vocabulary, now seemed the only path forward. It's in our living room, with its worn-out sofas and family photos adorning the walls. The air was thick with unspoken words. I sat opposite Alex, both of us grappling with the reality of Martin's deceit. So it's you now. I always thought Dad was just eccentric. Alex started, breaking the silence. But this is something else. I sighed, my mind racing back through the years. Your father wasn't always like this, I confessed. When we first met, Martin was charming, full of life. But somewhere along the line, he lost himself in these pursuits. Alex leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. What are we going to do? We can't just sit back and watch as he ruins everything. A plan was taking shape in my mind, one that would require patience and cunning. We'll expose him for who he truly is, make him face the consequences of his actions. But how? Alex's eyes were searching, desperate for a way to right his father's wrongs. We'll start by understanding the extent of his gambling. We need to know how deep this goes, I said, a steely resolve in my voice. As over the next few days, I dug into our finances. The more I uncovered, the grimmer the picture became. Credit card debts, emptied savings accounts, and a slew of unpaid bills. Martin's gambling was not just a pastime. It was an addiction that was bleeding us dry. Because of my evening, as Martin was out, presumably at one of his gambling haunts, I confronted Alex with my findings. Look at this, I said, laying out the bills and bank statements on the kitchen table. He's been lying to us for months, maybe even years. Alex's face hardened as he scanned the documents. He's gambling away our future, he said, his voice laced with anger. It's worse than I thought. We're on the brink of financial ruin because of his actions. Determination flared in Alex's eyes. We can't let him do this to us, to Sophie. We have to stop him. That night we hatched a plan. A plan to strip Martin of his illusions, to make him face the reality of his actions. It was a plan born of desperation, but also of a deep-seated desire for justice. We would use his gambling addiction against him, turn his vice into his downfall. It was risky, morally ambiguous, and fraught with potential pitfalls, but it was a chance we had to take. As I lay in bed that night, the house silent except for the occasional creak of its aging bones, I couldn't help but feel a sense of mourning for the life I thought I had. But there was no turning back now. The game was set, and the players were in motion. The following week was a whirlwind of whispered conversations and surreptitious planning. X and I were a team, bound together by our shared sense of betrayal and the urgent need to act. During one evening with Sophie safely out at a friend's house, we decided it was time to confront Martin. The atmosphere in the house was electric as we awaited his return from another gambling spree. As the door clicked open and Martin stepped in, his face flushed with the rush of gambling, he was met with a sight that clearly unnerved him. Alex and I sitting in the living room, an array of bank statements and bills spread out before us. Action. Martin, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He laughed nervously. What's all this? Planning some home renovations? It's about your gambling, I cut straight to the point. And the lies. We know everything. Button. For a moment Martin's facade faltered, his eyes darting to the documents on the table, but he quickly regained his composure, a smirk playing on his lips. Oh, that's just a bit of fun. Claudia, nothing for you to worry your pretty head about? I felt a surge of anger at his dismissive tone. Fun? I snapped. Straining our savings fun. Fits as lying to your family fun. Martin's smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. I'll have to explain myself to you. It's my money. I earned it. But it's not just your money, is it? Actually, says. Alex interjected, his voice cold. It's money for our home, for our future. Forget you're gambling it all away. Martin's gaze shifted between us, the realization dawning that his usual tactics wouldn't work this time. I don't see what the big deal is. So I gamble a bit. It's under control. It's not under control, I countered, my voice rising. We're on the brink of financial ruin because of your bit of gambling. You've lied to us. But you betrayed this family. For a moment there was silence. Then Martin exploded. You're blowing this out of proportion. I'm the man of this house. I make the decisions, and I don't need to be lectured by the likes of you. His words hung in the air, a testament to his selfishness and disregard for us. I looked at Alex, and without a word we both stood up. This isn't over. Martin's eyes said firmly. We won't let you destroy this family. As we left the room, leaving Martin to stew in his anger, I felt a mix of fear and determination. We had crossed a line, but there was no turning back now. The battle lines were drawn, and it was time to bring Martin to justice. The days following the confrontation with Martin were tense. The house felt like a battlefield, silent and charged with unspoken anger. Martin kept to himself, emerging only for meals, his interactions with us tears and cold. It was during this uneasy truce that Alex received unexpected news. Mom, I need to talk to you about something important, he began, his voice unsteady. It's about Emily, my girlfriend. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. What about her? Alex? He took a deep breath, his eyes betraying his inner turmoil. She's pregnant. Mom. The news hit me like a ton of bricks, but it was what Alex said next that truly shook me. But it can't be mine. I was told I'm infertile a few years ago after a medical issue. Emily swears she hasn't been with anyone else. I don't know what to think. And my heart ached for Alex, seeing him so lost and hurt. Have you talked to Emily about this? Maybe there's been some mistake with your diagnosis. Alex shook his head. I don't know. Everything is so messed up. I thought we had a future together, and now this. Determined to support my son, I suggested. Let's talk to Emily together. We need to understand what's happening. The meeting with Emily was emotional. She was a young woman, barely 20, her face etched with worry and fear. As she spoke, her words were punctuated with sobs. I swear, Alex sighed, I've never been with anyone else. I don't understand how this is happening, Emily cried. Her distress was palpable, and despite the confusion, I believed her. There was a sincerity in her eyes that couldn't be faked. We'll figure this out, Emily. We're in this together, Alex reassured her, though I could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. After Emily left, X and I sat in silence, the weight of the situation heavy on our shoulders. Mom, what if Dad's involved somehow? What if he's done something to Emily? Alex's voice was barely a whisper, but the implication of his words was clear. The thought had crossed my mind too. Martin's recent actions had shown he was capable of deceit on a grand scale. But this, it was a chilling thought. We need to be sure before we make any accusations, I cautioned. Let's get a paternity test done. And in the meantime, keep an eye on your father. If he's involved, we need to know. As Alex nodded in agreement, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We were already entangled in a web of Martin's making. If he had stooped this low, he would pay for it, and we would be the ones to make sure of it. To in person, the days following our decision to get a paternity test for Alex were fraught with tension. Martin, oblivious to the new storm brewing, continued his silent standoff, occasionally leaving the house for his gambling escapades. One afternoon, while Martin was out, Emily arrived, looking pale and distraught. "Plenty yet, Alex? I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. We sat down in the living room, the three of us forming a triangle of apprehension. Emily took a deep breath, and then her words came out in a rush. "It's about the baby and Martin." X and I exchanged a glance, our worst fears beginning to materialize. "What about Martin?" I asked, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she struggled to continue. "He came on to me one night, a few months ago. Said things about being a better match for me than Alex, about wanting to give me a real family." The room seemed to spin as her words sank in. Martin's betrayal had reached a level I never thought possible. "How could you keep this from me?" Exo's voice was a mix of hurt and anger. I was scared. "Alex, I didn't know what to do. And when I found out I was pregnant," Emily's voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. "This is my father's doing," Alex said, turning to me, his expression one of disbelief and disgust. "He's manipulated us all along." I put my arm around Emily, trying to offer some comfort despite the rage boiling inside me. "We'll handle this. Emily, Pachio, or not alone in this." After Emily left, Alex and I sat in stunned silence. That the revelation about Martin had changed everything. Our plan for revenge had been personal before, but now it was also about protecting Emily and her unborn child. "We need to act fast," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. "We'll need evidence of his gambling addiction, his affairs, everything. We need to expose him for who he really is." Alex nodded, his jaw set. "Oh, I'll look into his financial records, track his movements. We need to know where he goes, who he meets." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. We gathered evidence of Martin's gambling debts, his frequent visits to casinos, and questionable withdrawals from our joint accounts. We also documented his erratic behavior at home, building a case against him that was both damning and irrefutable. As we put the pieces together, a picture emerged of a man who was not only a compulsive gambler, but also a master manipulator. It was a hard truth to swallow, but it strengthened our resolve. The day of reckoning was approaching. Martin's house of cards was about to come crashing down, and we would be the ones to bring it down. The plan to bring Martin down was set into motion with meticulous care. X and I had gathered enough evidence to expose his gambling addiction and his deceitful ways. But we knew that mere exposure wasn't enough. Martin needed to feel the weight of his actions. Especially one evening, as Martin returned from what we assumed was another gambling session. Alex and I were waiting for him in the living room. The taken array of documents and photos spread out before us. Martin's eyes widened as he took in the scene. "What's all this?" he asked, trying to mask his unease with a forced chuckle. "It's your life," Martin laid out in all its shameful detail. I said, my voice cold and steady. Alex picked up a photograph of Martin entering a casino and tossed it on the table. "We know about your gambling. God. We've known for a while now." Burton scoffed, attempting to regain his composure. "So what? It's my money, my life. I don't see how it concerns you." But it does concern us." "Martin," I interjected, "your gambling has drained our savings, endangered our home. You've lied to us, betrayed us. And let's not forget about Emily," Alex added, his voice laced with contempt. Martin's face paled at the mention of Emily's name. "What about her?" "We know," rebelled Dad. "We know you manipulated her, took advantage of her," Alex said, his eyes burning with anger. Martin's facade finally crumbled, revealing a glimpse of panic. "You have no proof of that. It's her word against mine." "Oh, but we do have proof," I said, sliding a folder across the table to him. "Evidence of your gambling debts, your frequent visits to casinos, your withdrawals from our accounts, it's all here." Martin opened the folder, his hands trembling as he leafed through the documents. With each page, his defeat became more apparent. "This is your doing, isn't it? You've been plotting against me," he spat out, looking up at us with a mix of anger and fear. "Yes, Martin, we've been plotting to save this family from your destruction," I said firmly. "And now you're going to face the consequences," Alex added. "We're cutting off your access to our accounts, to any financial resources. You're going to learn what it means to lose everything." Martin slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation dawning on him. "You can't do this to me. I'm your husband, your father, you were—" I corrected him, "but you lost that right when you chose gambling and deceit over your family." As Martin left the room defeated and broken, Alex and I knew that this was just the beginning. He had set the wheels in motion, but the road to justice was long and uncertain. But one thing was clear. Martin's reign of manipulation and deceit was coming to an end, and we were the architects of his downfall. In the days that followed our confrontation with Martin, the atmosphere in our home grew even more tense. Martin had become a ghost, a mere shadow moving silently through the house, the weight of his misdeeds hanging heavily upon him. Fictions. It was during this time of strained silence that we decided to take the final step in our plan. We arranged for a meeting with a lawyer to discuss the possibility of legal action against Martin for his gambling and the emotional turmoil he had caused. On the day of the meeting, Martin looked like a man who had already accepted his defeat. For activities basties, we all sat around the dining table, the lawyer laying out the options before us. Given the evidence you've provided, there are several legal avenues we can explore, the lawyer began. That's the gambling debts, the misappropriation of family funds, and the emotional distress caused to your family. He knew the gravity of the situation, the precarious edge upon which he now teetered. We also need to consider the situation with Emily, Alex added, his voice firm. What Martin did to her is unforgivable. Yes, that's a serious allegation. If Emily is willing to testify, it could add significant weight to your case. It was clear that the walls were closing in on him, the reality of his actions finally coming to bear. First, we want to proceed with legal action, I said, my voice resolute. Martin needs to be held accountable for what he's done. The lawyer outlined the steps we would need to take, the legal processes that would unfold in the coming weeks and months. It was going to be a long and challenging journey, but one we were prepared to take. After the lawyer left, "You're really going to do this?" Rick cried forcevances, "Destroy me completely?" You did this to yourself. You chose your path, and now you have to face the consequences. There was a moment of silence, a final acknowledgement of the chasm that had grown between us. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But it did happen," Alex said, "and now you have to pay the price." At that, and as he walked away, I knew that our family would never be the same again. But we had taken a stand, chosen to fight back against the deception and betrayal that had threatened to tear us apart. The road ahead was uncertain, but we were ready to face it, together. The weeks following our decision to pursue legal action were a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The house, once filled with the warmth of a family, now felt more like a waiting room, each of us bracing for the next phase of our battle with Martin. During this time, Emily's presence became more frequent. Her strength in facing the situation with Martin was admirable, and Alex's support for her never wavered. They were united, a couple forged stronger by the trials they faced. The day of the court hearing arrived, a day that would mark a turning point in our lives. We sat in the courtroom, a united front against Martin, who sat alone, his usual bravado nowhere in sight. The evidence against Martin was overwhelming. The judge's expression grew increasingly grim as the details of Martin's gambling addiction, his reckless spending, and his manipulation of Emily were laid bare. When the judge finally spoke, his words were a condemnation of Martin's actions. "Your behavior has not only been irresponsible, but also destructive to your family." This court finds it necessary to take significant measures to ensure restitution and to prevent further harm. Martin was ordered to repay the debts he had incurred, to compensate for the emotional distress he had caused, and to undergo counseling for his gambling addiction. It was a harsh sentence, but one that was deserved. As we left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure, a chapter in our lives coming to an end. But it was also a beginning, a chance to rebuild and move forward. In the months that followed, Alex and Emily's relationship grew stronger. They decided to get married, embracing the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Emily's pregnancy progressed well, and the birth of their child, a beautiful baby girl, was a symbol of new beginnings and hope. Britton's presence in our lives diminished. He complied with the court's orders, but the distance between us remained. His actions had irrevocably changed our family, but they had also shown us our strength and resilience. As I watched Alex and Emily with their daughter, I realized that our family had survived the storm. We were scarred but not broken, and we had each other. And in the quiet moments when I watched the sunset from our porch, I knew that we would be okay. We had faced our trials and emerged stronger. Our story was one of pain and betrayal, but also of love and redemption. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace. A chapter had ended, but a new one was just beginning.